Okay, so hello and welcome everybody to our second Global Leadership Talk series. And today I'll be talking with a global panel of experts who all work in the field of D&I, diversity and inclusion. It's a great group of women. And well, let's go and introduce us. Oh, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Cellene Hoogenkamp. I'm the founder and principal of Global Spirited Leadership, at the moment situated in the US. So let's start. Barbara Daroca, Head of Services of ING Benelux. It's an online banking, the Orange Lion, the online banking, bank with over 850 employees, over 40 countries. And according to a recent article in the Financial Times, in the top European companies for inclusion for 2020. Quite something. Then we have Mylan Shalnick. She's principal at Amazon, but more importantly, she represents the aviation group of Global Aviation Group of Women Association on the D&I issues. Have I got that right?
Almost. International Aviation Women's Association.
That's it.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Maybe name change. And at night she is a lead singer in a French rock band.
I love it.
Next, we have Demetha Sanders, Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity for Cargill. And they are a big business to business, bringing food, agricultural, financial, and industrial products globally, right? You have about 160 employees in 70 countries, and you've been in business for over 150 years.
160,000 employees.
160,000, oh my God, 160,000 people. Next is Vicki Gleason. You are a Global Chief Head Human Resource Officer. That's a mouthful so early in the morning. And you have 4,200 people working globally with you across 63 associations, 63 countries, right?
63 locations. We are in about 25 countries.
Okay. And what Milliman does is they provide intelligent solutions to improve health and financial security.
Correct.
And then with me is my co-host, is Mercedes Martin. She's founder and CEO of Mercedes Martin and Company, an inclusion and global diversity organizational developer.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got you all now. So last week, the group of all our group had a really good conversation on diversity and inclusion. And it was actually so inspiring that this time we decided to record it and even go deeper into the conversation. So it was a warm-up last week, and here we go live. So during our conversation last week, I realized that the lens of diversity and inclusion is so much wider than I had imagined. It's more than gender, it's more than ethnicity, it's more than racial issues. Black Lives Matter, and it means so many different things in different countries. This time we're talking really more about the belonging of people in an organization and the inclusivity of it, inclusion part, and the listening and the accountability. So, and that many companies are wanting to do the right thing, but the question often is how. So that's what we're going to focus on this time. And I'm going to ask each of our panel members to kick off with a succinct introduction for themselves, why D&I is important in their lives, and what was your key takeaway from our last week's conversation? What stood out for you last week? Who wants to kick it off?
This is Demetha. I'll go ahead and start. So Demetha Sanders, and when I think about inclusion, diversity, even the word equity, some companies are starting to add that, I think about my life. So, I am everything that I need to have of organizations when it comes to inclusion and diversity. And that means that when we talk about, what happens to people as they're going through their lives and wanting to be successful or looking for that success, everything around them somehow impacts that. And so you're impacted from the moment that you're born because of what's going on with your families and your homes and your livelihoods. You're impacted through your schooling, your university, and then ultimately once you get into the corporate world, you're impacted there. If you even get into the corporate world, you're impacted there as well. So when I think about this, it is important to me because it is me. It's important to my life and my livelihood, as I think most of us would be able to say that. But I've had to think about who I was as a person all of my life, and I know some people don't have to go through that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Barbara. I work indeed for ING in Luxembourg. I think one of the things that I agree with you, Cellene, when you say last week we spoke for quite a while and it became really clear that diversity and inclusion is so large and can take so many forms. So for me, it kind of left me with a question like, why do we even have to talk about this? Because it touches really everybody. So it's kind of funny. Yes, of course, not everybody is super diverse and not everybody feels excluded. But as Demetha says, when you come to the corporate world and you start talking about inclusion, yes, of course, there is, inclusion because of your gender and your ethnicity or race or social status, maybe background, but it can be also just because you think differently than the others, and you think differently because you had a different upbringing or a different experience. You come from a different sector, maybe. So that's maybe the easiest part of inclusion. I know there are a lot of barriers for a lot of people, so I'm not trying to minimize it in any way, but it kind of stood up for me a bit. It stuck with me saying, it's weird that only some of us are talking about it or find it so important that we think it should be talked about, whereas it really affects everybody. So it kind of stuck with me over the weekend last week.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Good point.
Milan, do you want to add to that?
Yes, Milan Skolnick. I have been involved in a variety of diversity and inclusion efforts throughout my career. What was interesting last week was that I think all our personal stories have triggered us to be involved in this field. We were talking about fatigue on the subject, but I think we're far away from being fatigued. There's still a lot to do. There's a lot to discuss. And I think it's a topic that we need to continue working on really hard. So I've been on the board of this association, IWA, that's done a lot of work for the advancement of women's career in the aviation industry, where we are pretty behind in terms of gender diversity and equity. So there's obviously a lot of efforts being done, a lot of discussions, and I think benchmarking corporations one against the other is a great exercise so that we can all continue to learn and continue to find the right path. There's again a lot of work to be done, and it's not to be taken that we're there yet.
Yeah. So Vicki, you weren't here in the conversation last week we had. What is your 2-minute summing up and your role in D&I, and how do you see it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting listening to everything that the other three panel members have said, because it all very much resonates with me. I've spent most of my career in professional services and specifically financial services, which is pretty heavily dominated by males, white males for that matter. And I've had my own different types of experiences with inclusion, having lived abroad for quite a while in a time when globalization didn't exist, having adopted a child from Russia who has some special needs and trying to champion her through her life. So for me, especially what Demetha was saying, the things that impact you as you're growing up and that you experience and how you're trying to navigate all of this, even in the professional world, has really hit me as something that I'm excited to embrace, and we have so much work to do. I don't know, that it will be progressive or that it will be quick, but it excites me to think about the difference that we can make, and just bringing more awareness and giving people the platform to really talk about their concerns and how to do things better in general.
Mm. Mercedes, do you want to jump in, or?
Sure. So I'm Mercedes Martin, and like Demetha, the other part of the bulk of my time I spend in Miami, Florida. The wrap is don't laugh. It is actually 72, but it feels cold in here. So as Cellene, and thank you for inviting us, Cellene, to this great conversation. My work touches on a lot of the comments that you've made in the intro. So I am a CEO of Mercedes Martin and Company, and what I noticed in the experience, been doing this work for close to 30 years now, is that we tend to segregate diversity and inclusion. So leadership development is in one end, you go to that, you go to the talent development cycle is one thing, and then you go to diversity and inclusion. And similar to Barbara's comments, what I realized in doing this work and our belief is that it is part of our everyday. When we talk about inclusion, when we talk about really being conscious of diversity, is the everyday life of a team where all of that is happening and the change actually takes place. So our work, my work and my belief is that diversity and inclusion is really something that's integrated, is not different than high performance, is not different than creating a positive human experience at work. And that's when I talk about psychological safety, I talk about engagement, I talk about belonging, and then diversity makes it the triple, the trifecta of the three.
Mm-hmm.
High performance needs are the same as positive human experiences in the workplace. Is the same thing as being included. And I'm loving my work right now. I say that emotionally, I'm exhausted. My background here in Miami, I identify as Afro-Cubana. I'm a Cuban refugee raised here in the United States. So I have these multiple lenses and perspectives looking at things. And obviously these pandemics have impacted me in a certain way, both personally and professional. But when it comes to the professional and my purpose and why I do this work, I'm mentally accelerated because post-COVID, we see so much movement and opportunity, in particular in bringing all of this together. So really happy to be here on this panel with all of you and learn from you as well. So
Yay.
Thank you.
Yay, thank you. And it's such a great group to have together. And what I actually, before we jump into the questions, what I'm hearing in our conversation now is that diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity and equity, it's very much more of a strategic part of what we think of just something to slide in. And so how are you thinking about that? But so where does it live in the organization? Is it primarily driven by HR? Or when I was listening, Demetha saying it's in all of us, but in a lot of company, it's not in all of us. It's like a push from senior directors or from the top level and HR. So where do you sit on that? Where are we in this? Are we pushing it through the organization? Vicki, where are you? Is it coming from an HR drive?
I would say it's both. It's bottom up and top down. So after all of the civil unrest that happened in the late spring, early summer, we had a group of employees that came together and started focusing on what was really important to them and becoming much more vocal. And at the same time, it was important to senior leadership as well. So we were able to put out our DE&I statement and form some employee resource groups. So we have a committee around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it all just kind of started melding together. Again, as I think I mentioned, we're in the infancy of doing this. We are an extremely decentralized company, so we have some challenges with how we're going to really make sure that we sustain this and keep it living. But I would say it's happening, from top down and bottom up, and kind of meeting in the middle so that it's this growing organism that's just kind of becoming part of what we're doing.
Vicki, it sounds like what we're hearing from some organizations that post both COVID and the George Floyd experience here in the United States, the company then took on a more accelerated or strategic look into the diversity and inclusion study. Could you speak a little bit about what was the plan before and after to get a sense of?
Sure. So again, we are an extremely decentralized organization, which in the 66 locations that we have, it's each location is kind of owned by an equity principal and equity partner, and they run their own business. So, and then the corporate layer at the top kind of supports those businesses. So there isn't an overarching corporate top-down structure in the first place. So everybody is kind of, although one company, they're still moving and kind of breathing their own culture at their own local level. So we are still very decentralized in how we are approaching this, but there has been a movement from the employees to say, wait a minute, we need more, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the leaders at the top as to how you're going to support this in conjunction with what's happening at the local level. So we're, again, very much at the beginning stages of doing this as a company. We have some locations, I would say, that are further along in the journey than others. And so we're trying to provide support to everybody and get one conversation going across all of the locations. And we're in many different countries as well. And diversity means something very different all over the world. Not necessarily inclusion, but the diversity piece is very different. So I would say we're on a learning journey as well. And just trying to open up that dialogue to understand where are we really in all of these different places. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think what you highlight in your example is one of the first questions that in the strategy, right? So what's our structure? What's our culture? How is this going to be something that is really going to be absorbed by the culture? So Barbara, I'm wondering, when Vicki finishes there and says, and we're also in different countries, and that's a big challenge, and you are in a different country, and that's one of the things that we also are hearing, especially earlier this year, when outside of the US, this became the pandemic #2, right? On social justice, Black Lives Matters. How did you handle and how did your strategy shift after this experience being outside of the US and Luxembourg?
I'm not sure there was a real shift this year, probably because the shift at ING worldwide came last year already, when at group level we devised a new D&I strategy and put also a proper structure behind it in place, with a central team that measures certain data. I don't have all the details. I would have to go in the intranet and read them for you. But one of the main things that we did last year already was set the objective of, we call it the 70% objective, which says that in any team and at any level across ING, there cannot be more than 70% of the same, whether it's the same gender or the same ethnicity, religious and sexual orientation, depending on whether that's out on the open or not, etc., etc. So it's an objective. It's not a reality yet, of course, but it's an objective that is taken very seriously and has really permeated throughout the organization. I find there's a lot of communication around it internally. So we, if I can put it a bit bluntly, but we are reminded again and again that there is this objective and we should pursue it, which I think is really good, because I think that sometimes, especially when talking about diversity, I'm totally convinced that diversity and inclusion should really go hand in hand, but still a lot of people get stuck in the diversity part. And of course, nobody wants to admit that they are sexist or racist or ageist or anyist because it's not nice and it's not fun. And none of us would
It's a
ever
reaction.
believe that we are.
Yeah.
But we might be, as Demetha said, because our upbringing made us so. And we never were really exposed to something different. So we don't realize that we're actually not accepting other people for whatever reason. So I think when we only talk about diversity, it becomes sometimes a bit confrontational, because there's the people who have potentially suffered in some way and then think, this is something we need to talk about and we need to put on the table. And there's the people who have never been confronted themselves, lucky them, and then they're like, well, why? There's no reason, there's no problem, everything's fine. So it becomes a bit of a confrontation, and then you come to situations like, well, but such as the 70% objective. Well, we have the women, or we have the people of color, or we have the people that are not lawyers and economists, but we have one engineer, so we're all good, we're set. But if the one engineer is not allowed to open their mouth in any meeting and is not allowed to contribute to any decision and so on, then you've done only the diversity part, you haven't done the inclusion part, which I think is very important.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you saying, oh, sorry, Mercedes.
No, I was just
in?
going to say to Barbara that what a great story and trajectory, and especially for organizations that have been looking at the D&I from this strategic perspective. What I typically hear is exactly what you said. We didn't have to change it that much. We were already in track. Maybe we needed to emphasize something here and there, and that's the beauty. I know, Cellene, you want to say something, and then if we can go to after Cellene, Milan, I wanted to come to you and ask you from a gender perspective and strategy if you've seen differences. But Cellene, I know you want to say something.
Yeah. I just saw from Barbara's conversation what I'm actually getting is diversity is a statistic, is data, is numbers. Inclusion is a human behavior.
I find sometimes it's the easy way to explain to people who say, what's the I? What's the, again, we got the people. So why do we have, they're included because they are here. And they say, well.
But if we're looking at operationalizing D&I in an organization, then it's like you can drive numbers by saying having a rule not more than 70% of any whatever the criteria is. But then that's a totally different approach to get everybody of that 70% in a conversation of inclusivity, inclusion, and belonging. So that's like you know what I mean? It's like a matrix. And then how do you measure inclusion? Like, I guess diversity is not so hard to measure, but then how do you measure inclusion? What do we do?
So it's interesting. It's not a question of measuring inclusion. It's a question of actioning it. So when you have meetings, you get everybody to introduce themselves, for example. Some companies don't do it. If somebody is new in the team, you introduce that new person in the team. There's a lot of little things that corporations do to make sure that inclusion is there, and it comes, from a really more of a cultural standpoint than anything else. So corporations have to take the habits of thinking about inclusion in everything they do, in arranging meetings, in the way they recruit, of course. But it becomes, you're right, it becomes a behavior, and you need to have a tip on inclusion at every of your meeting to think about it, and for example, to allow everyone to express their ideas during that meeting. So it's a subtle thing, but it needs to be called out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like creating a culture of belonging, I guess.
Right.
Definitely.
And we tend to say, and I don't know where I saw this quote from, so it's not mine, but I use it. It's diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act. And so when you think about diversity, you think about things like representation, who's in the room, the diversity of the group, like do you have different of whatever's in the group, as Barbara kind of mentioned before, it's not all the same. And when you think about inclusion, you think about the act. Those are the things, the intentionality that you have to put behind ensuring that people are, at Cargill, we say welcome, valued, and heard, so that we know that people are having the opportunity to achieve the careers that they're looking for, that they feel like their voices are important, they feel like they are welcomed in the organization. So you're creating space so that people feel welcomed, valued, and heard. So in the simple words, diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act.
Would you build on that,
great way of putting it?
Because when we heard Cellene asking the question or clarifying and saying, so I hear diversity as the data, right? That's your measurements. And then inclusion, as you're saying, the act. Can you build a little bit on that? And how is it that you're introducing that same idea, or how do you do it? How is it working in your?
Sure. So at Cargill, we spent a lot of time, like most companies, looking at diversity, meaning measuring the representation and the numbers inside of the organization, and our diverse talent pools and diverse slates and all the things that you can count, because that's really where you get down to what it is that you're looking for diversity. And we decided years ago that we would put inclusion in front of this, meaning that we had to create an environment where people would feel like they could be welcomed and they're valued. Because if you don't do that, then all the work that you're doing to bring diverse representation to your organization, it's wasted effort. You won't get anywhere by bringing people to an organization where they don't feel included. So we said intentionally, we have to actually measure inclusion too. And it's not just about the engagement scores. I mean, that's one thing that you can certainly look at, but there's other things like their participation in the organization. So we've had business resource groups in Cargill for more than 30 years, where our employees are part of groups that are, similar groups, et cetera, around the organization. And one of the things we wanted to see is how people are actually even participating in those. Because if you're feeling included, you feel like this is a place where you can actually go and think about, talk to people that are like you, where your voices are heard. We're also looking at things like career advancement and promotion, because if you're talking about inclusion, that also means that people have the ability to have a successful career at the organization. So are we seeing promotion rates the same and or similar for different types of people, or only one group, one group being promoted or recognized? So taking a look at all of your practices in the organization to say, if you are truly an inclusive organization, then inclusion will run through the veins of your organization. It is not something that you measure just by counting people. It is something that you do. It is a part of the work. It's a part of your investment strategy. It's a part of your community engagement. It's a part of all of the things that make you an organization. So we spent a lot of time talking about it. In fact, now we're spending more time talking about equity and what that means and how that impacts this work. Because you can be diverse, you can be inclusive. If you're not doing this equitable, you're still not getting anywhere. And even the farthest end of that is justice. So how do you ensure that there's justice for all in the world? So there's a lot of work that still has to be done. And I would certainly say that we are not the role models to saying that we've gotten it right. I don't know who's gotten it right, but we are certainly on the right path to getting there.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to come back to, because I love the roadmap and also the nuggets that each one of you is sharing with us and the learnings. And I want to come back to you, Milliman, because I want to hear, especially I want to hear your perspective. We're hearing about big strategy, and the way I'm hearing it is your strategy is probably a little bit more focused on one of those dimensions of diversity, women. And I'm curious, when we hear that, yes, some organizations have shifted, some have not, what has been the impact, post-COVID, post-George Floyd, on your work and strategy with women? Are you seeing the same level of traction? What has changed? And let me share with you why I asked that question. I'll use myself as an example. When I'm in a Latino group, sometimes I hear, wow, all of the attention right now is going to diversity is about being Black. And we've lost this broader perspective that we talked about at the beginning. And I'm wondering if you're hearing some of that, or if that sentiment has impacted your strategy focus on gender, if at all.
Thank you. From the association standpoint, COVID has made it harder for us to have an impact, because one of the highlights of the association was to bring into the same room hundreds of women at our conferences, where we would meet, exchange, network, and we would have panels of extraordinary women in front of us from the aviation industry that would inspire us. We would come out supercharged and bring back to our corporations a lot of new ideas. So we've lost for sure the momentum there. We've tried to compensate it through virtual meetings, but it's not the same until we come back to reconnect and to get re-energized. We've lost a little bit of that because of COVID. Did we lose the attention? In a way, maybe, but we don't really depend on what media does or what the environment does. We still have to push through. I have to say, we try to continue to improve, but it's still super challenging in our industry. So we're trying everything we can, from mentoring to connecting to networking to encouraging companies to embed gender diversity from top to bottom in all processes. We use, for example, Qantas as a fantastic example for diversity, where they had to go into all of the aircraft training manuals was saying the pilot he, so they had to change the entire thousands of manuals to say he or she. So details like that have to be embedded, and then they have their CEO who would not sit on a panel, or who would not enter a boardroom if not half of the room is woman. So we have some shining lights ahead of us, but we feel we still have so much work to do. So in terms particularly on career advancement, on retaining women in the workforce, they come into the workforce, we can't it's very difficult to retain them. The work-family balance is very challenging in our industry, probably in other industries as well. So corporations have to make a conscious effort to accommodate. So maybe COVID in a way made it somehow easier for women to be at home and work from home, but on the other hand, their chores and the load that with the homeschooling has made it actually probably worse. So not an easy situation. And not a lot of progress, but we continue to try to do the work to inspire, to influence women in the industry.
Great. And thank you for the work that you're doing there. We wanted to get a little bit more specific. And, when Cellene and I were talking about this conversation last night, and we realized that the industry matters. So while we're talking here about the large strategy, in our conversations, we realized that depending on the industry, both the impact and how that strategy has had to shift, or what you're learning, has been very different. And Cellene, I don't know if you, you had a specific question around this, but what I was going to throw out to the group was, not Barbara, I thought Vicki, because you were the first one who brought the whole notion of different industry. Where you're at today, can you share some of what have been the learnings, the lessons learned, or a nugget that you can share to others specific to your industry, where you had to tailor, or something that you had to get really what we call in the data precise, analytics precise on what to do?
Yeah, we are actuarial services and sciences, again, financial services, very heavily dominated by males, just by the individuals coming out of universities and the degrees that they have. There are very few women that, I shouldn't say very few, but there are less women that major in math, actuarial sciences, financial type related degrees. So we are starting to look at recruitment processes and how can we really target specific universities, and how can we continue to try and focus on growing that area, we have supported a math mentors program, and specifically for women who want to get into the software industry. So we're giving actual money to these organizations and trying to find ways to have stronger scholarships to reach out into these universities to promote what we do and really try from the bottom up to reach out and start growing these individuals and growing our pipeline. But again, we have a lot of work to do, especially being so decentralized, because we don't have a centralized recruitment function. So it happens at the local level. So again, providing support to those local practices, how can they recruit in a different manner? How can they think about it differently? What universities are they looking at? Not necessarily their own alma maters, but trying to go through that data, and then, again, through internships and growing our pipeline. That's pretty much where we're starting from.
It sounds like a deeper relationship with the higher education and starting there.
Even high schools, we're looking at high schools, and what roles don't necessarily need a 4-year degree, and where can we go in and establish relationships even at a more junior level, or how can we get those kids from high school interested in actuarial sciences or software development, and what are those programs looking like for women and for everybody, for underrepresented groups of all types.
Great.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of add something to that conversation, because I've worked for 3 very different types of industries in my career, and every industry I've gone to, they've said it's a male-dominated industry. So I believe that we are programming ourselves to believe that every industry is a male-dominated industry, and that's not okay. It starts very early on for what we tell our children about what they can be, or what we allow them to be, or what we want them to be. It starts very early by having role models where they can see people that are like them. But this narrative that it's a male-dominated industry is a narrative that I have heard at every single organization I've gone through. And the only places that you don't hear it are maybe in the makeup industry. It's the only place you don't hear someone saying something similar. But then those organizations are owned or under the umbrella of bigger organizations that are then again a male-dominated organization. So I honestly believe that the narrative has to change. Like, we have to change that narrative. If we continue to allow that to be the thing that stops us or prevents us from inviting more people into the conversation or into our organizations, we're never going to make it out of where we are today. We are in this position because we have programmed ourselves to believe that, and all these subtle things that you see around you every single day are helping to reinforce that programming. We have to get out of that, and that's not an easy thing to do. So, thinking about, I think Apple just changed the emoji on their phone. If you typed in CEO on the phone just a couple of months ago, a man popped up easily. And so who's to say that the man is the only person that can be a CEO? That's not okay. If you think about the chef industry or cooks, women are apparently the people in the homes that do all the cooking, but as soon as you walk into a restaurant, the head chef is a man, because we programmed ourselves to say, technically, chefs are men, but at the house, women, you cook. So it becomes this narrative that we are reinforcing through our own work. And so we are pulling away from that and saying, we can't use those words anymore. We can't say that, because then we're telling ourselves that it's not possible for us to have women. It's a cop-out.
So it's great. And this is where training on unconscious bias is critical, and allows to deconstruct all of these programming. When I say I work in aviation, people ask me if I am a cabin attendant. So that's where we still are. So the deprogramming, I agree with you. But even how long is it going to take to do that deprogramming? That's where I'm a little bit concerned. Like, we're trying to do, but so we need to train people intensively on unconscious bias to remove all of these biases about, and you're right, bringing role model is critical, but it's not enough.
Yeah, you're so right.
We talk about how long it's going to take, and we went through a pandemic, a couple of months ago, when we thought we could not have people working from home, and companies figured out how to make this happen in a week. In some cases less, where they figured out how to get all of their employee base that can never work from home, working from home. We can solve the most innovative, the most complex challenges in the world. But when it comes to inclusion and diversity, we always like it's too hard. We always make that a cop-out. We don't treat it like it's a business imperative. We treat it like it's something else. If we can solve, we can solve how to get 100,000 people working remote in like 2 days. You absolutely can solve how you can get more diversity into your organization.
And you know what? That's a perfect. We went and we need to do this more often. I love the energy. I love the energy here. And Cellene, before I turn it over to you, I wanted to just. It kind of goes with the flow, and Demetha, thank you, because you got us started. And Milliman, it's so what do we want for the future? What do we see? What we're talking about here in mindset and really reprogramming our narratives, all of that is possible, and we saw how quickly it's been able to be done. But we also know what we're learning from the neurosciences, that by having a clarity of where we're going in the future, and especially with something that's so I like to say it's complex, not complicated. We make it more complicated than it needs to be. I love, Barbara, when you started to say, why are we talking about this? This is to be so like, everybody needs to know this. What do you see in the future to help you to really set that course on what you want that new horizon to be, especially given what we've just experienced? What do you want to see? How do you see that future shaping up with this? Barbara, I'm going to ask you. You just won an award. You have a solid strategy. I hear there's a lot of work, but you're on the right path. What do you see in the future?
I don't know. I wish I could tell you.
Let me see my crystal ball.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't know. I think there are. Obviously I have a more medium or short-term hopes for my own professional life and career, not my own specifically, but the time when I will still be working. And I would hope that we have that we have reached a moment where diversity and inclusion is, as you said, is really as important as income generation and cost containment. It's just a given that that's how you do business. It's part of it, and it's natural, and it's not something special that the HR lady needs to remind us of. That would be already, I think, a huge step. More longish termish, I'm a mom of 2 boys, and as Demetha was saying, I pay a lot of attention, and it's something that I didn't realize before being a mom, maybe, to whenever I speak with them and we talk about what they want to be, or when they see different types of jobs or responsibilities, that I really make it very clear that whatever it is, they can do it. In my case, they're boys, so potentially, naturally, they will have more chances. I don't know, unless we change the narrative first and everything. But still, sometimes, one of the eldest is a really sweet, caring boy, and I think he would be great also in more of a healthcare type profession, or maybe more teacher or kindergarten person that we know are typically women dominated, female dominated area. So I really make a point of it, and it has happened to me that he'd come earlier and said things like, but she cannot do it because she's a girl, and me almost fall off my chair, like, what? No. So I would hope that when they grow up, this is a non-issue. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you. What do you see, and especially your passion, your work around the gender lens here? What would you like to see in the future?
Who was the question to? Sorry.
Oh, Milan. Am I pronouncing your name?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Milan.
Okay.
I think I see the future, pretty bright. I think the attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the forefront. And a lot of work, a lot of efforts is being done. I think our generation is going to educate their children differently, so we will see a shift. we have to continue, educating, learning, and I think corporations are all going to pay more attention and bring diversity and inclusion as a process, as we bring in safety, as we think about sustainability. All of these big topics are now being tackled in a very different way. And maybe the pandemic will be a wake-up call, and we'll have kind of shifted all of our assumptions, and we need to revisit everything again. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty optimistic, and where I work, I know that we do a tremendous effort, and we have an incredible diverse pool of employee, and it's working very well.
Great. So I'm hearing the hope. One is starting at the home with your boys and changing that narrative, and the other is that you're really highlighting what some of the changes have already happened. Demetha, for you, quick looks. I know that, and Vicki, I'll come back right after. What's the future hold? How do you see it in your position?
I mean, I see a future where inclusion is possible. I mean, we can, again, solve so many complicated or complex problems. This is not one that we can't solve if we don't really put our mind and true effort behind it. As an organization, I think storytelling is so important, being able to hear the stories and understand the narrative that you are sharing. Your words matter, and how do we talk about things, and how do we, what do we put in front of our people every single day? We started at our organization at Cargill doing inclusion moments. We used to have safety moments, and we still do safety moments. We have inclusion moments at the beginning of meetings. And the reason that we have those is so we can continue to tell the stories about what it means to be inclusive. And we are growing so much just by people telling those stories as an organization. I think that's going to be one of the things that'll kind of push us over to where we need to be. And inclusion moments are, I mean, inclusion moments are wonderful, but if it's not built into your DNA and there's no accountability for it, then it doesn't work. And so the future is where this is a part of every single thing that you do. It already is, but you are intentional about what you're doing there, and you're thoughtful about what has to happen. And you get to a point where you don't need a chief diversity officer, because diversity is just what you do as a part of your organization. That's what the future looks like. And I am optimistic, as Cellene said, that we can get there with the right focus, with the right energy. And now's the time. People are asking the right questions and making the right moves. So I honestly believe that we will start to see some big differences in how we operate.
Great. I hear that conviction, and I'm there to head to that future. Vicki, you close this out. What do you see?
Well, I think everything that everybody said before me, especially, changing the narrative, like Demetha was saying, using different words and just having it become a part of us every single day. I don't know that I have anything different to add than the way that everybody else phrased it before me. It was
and thank you, because it's great as I'm listening to you on that future and what you're hearing and what you're saying on the narrative. A lot of times you have these conversations and people will still turn around and say, but what's one thing that I could do? And if there's one thing that we can leave folks with, at least for me, is that nugget of what's the narrative that you need to change, and are you conscious about the language that you're using? So thank you. Cellene, what your future?
Well, I was going to do like a one key takeaway for everybody, but I think we just did it, right? This is like a really good sum up. So for me, the future is, as working as in the coaching and executive leadership industry, that we change the narrative throughout the organization with everybody. So I like working with the senior people, and I like working with the younger, the Z generation, or the Z generation, as we say. And the narrative between the two groups is very different. And that keeps me learning. So for me, I would like to see more of that narrative that is at the younger layer of the organization to come up. And how the top level can be bring a wider listening and create a bigger sense of belonging. So then it is becoming no longer let's tie diversity to our wage bonuses, etc. I mean, what some organizations are doing. That to me is like, okay, you can do that, but really, that's that what we need to do? So, and that is what I see in the future, that we don't need those sorts of initiatives anymore. Yeah, like it is becoming part of the DNA of who people are. And that is, I'm finding that a rich part in increasing the unconscious biases, the awareness to that, and just more of an inclusive conversation. And I know I've got a long way to go with that. So I'm excited about that, actually. It's a learning of it.
It's a journey. It's a journey.
It's a journey. It's a journey in it.
Love it. Well, thank you for inviting all of us to be part of your journey.
I enjoyed it. So thank you. I'm mindful of everybody's time. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for listening and participating. And if you want to get in touch with any of our panelists, please do it through LinkedIn, right? Probably it's the best way. You have the names on the list. Till next time.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Be
Thank
safe.
you.
Be well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.